All right, let's talk about method books. Now, this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a long time now, and it is something that has been quite a point of contention in my own time as a student and in my own time as a teacher. And so I wanted to sort of unscramble all of this and talk about the situations where a method book is useful and talk about the situations where a method book is an absolutely awful idea. So, what do I mean by a method book? I have a couple of examples. Here's one such example, the Alfred Group Piano. This has everything from sort of beginner things like what a half step and a whole step is, and by the end of the book, you are playing, pretty simple classical pieces, and it has all the scale fingerings and all that. And funnily enough, in the back is a CD for people who are still into CDs. So that's one example. Another much older example of a method book is Hannah, the Virtuoso Pianist. So this is a compilation of 60 exercises for the piano. It's centuries old and still being used. So this is another example of a method book. So let's talk about sort of what situations would be a good idea to use a method book. And for this video, I will use the piano as an example. That's just because that's my main instrument, but this can apply anywhere else. So say you have a very beginning student, absolutely no knowledge of music, they're just touching a piano for the first time, and you are teaching them sort of where to lay their hands, the proper sitting posture, all of that stuff. You teach them sort of the names of the notes and all that. That would be a situation where you could say in your lesson, here are the names of the notes, here's the proper posture, here's how to position your hands on the piano, here's, maybe the C major scale or, something simple. Then you could go say, out of this book, work through exercises 1 through 5 for next week and have them, all ready to perform. So that is one example where a method book would be useful because especially where they can write things in, where they can pencil things in, where they can pencil the names of the notes in the book, and they can be it's like a very hands-on activity, and they can bring that in to the next lesson. So that would be an example of where a method book is very useful. Another example of where a method book would be useful is if you as a teacher are dictating, we're going to have a studio class, and so therefore we're going to perform for each other, and say these are mostly beginner students, and so I want you to be working out of the same book, learning the same fingerings, doing all the same stuff, so I as a teacher can assess your musicianship better. Now, I have a lot of complicated opinions on that specifically, and I can make an entire video about that, but that's another example where a method book might come in handy because then they're all working from the same material. All right, now let's talk about some situations where using a method book would not be such a good idea. So I think there very much comes a point where you do enough exercise out of this book and it just becomes a laborious task. And your student's like, I don't want to write in these fingers anymore. This is stupid. I feel like I'm in school and I don't want to write my name on the top of the paper and turn in my practice sheet and all that. So there may, come a point where your student is acting that way. In that case, you stop using the method book because they're sick of it. I think, you do what your student wants to do. And this isn't a pedagogy video by any means, and I could make a pedagogy video if you want to see that, put that in the comments. But, you do what your students' goals are, and, if they're like, I want to play a Bach prelude and fugue, then you bring them to that point. Or if they're, already to that point, then assign them the Bach prelude and fugue. There you go. It doesn't need to be super complicated. So I think that would be a situation where using a method book would actually complicate things. It'd be an incredible waste of time. So I think if the student is like, here's what I want to learn. I want to learn this. Obviously, you can negotiate with them. You can say, well, in order to play, blah, 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 piece, you need to master this exercise out of the hand and whatever. So you technically could sort of negotiate with them, but still, I just think that if they're to that point where they're like, I don't want to use the method book anymore, don't use the method book. Similarly, if they're like, this method book, only is classical music and I don't want to play classical music. I want to, play jazz, or my ambition, is to become a, pop star and I want to perform in the cover bands at the casinos and I want to do that, then you could say, okay, well, this method book probably isn't a good idea anymore. Now, in the case of jazz, that may be a little bit more complicated because there are jazz method books out there. Actually, very, very good jazz method books. So those do exist. And so that's a way to do it. If your student is like, I want to, keep using method books, but I want to play classical music, then you find a jazz method book. All right, so the question then becomes, is a method book useful, and should I use a method book as a teacher or even as a student? And I think if you are a beginner, a method book is very, very useful. And so that's something that I've talked about previously in this video. If you're a beginner, use a method book because it teaches you that stuff. You can write it in. It's a very hands-on activity. If you are more an advanced player and you're like, I want to, play a Bach Prelude and Fugue, or I want to play, Chopin piece, or those are classical examples, or I want to learn how to play Elton John as a, pop example, or I want to learn how to play, There Is No Greater Love, then you could say, okay, maybe no method book. So I think once you get to a point, then it's really not necessary anymore. So should you use it? Do you have to use a method book as a teacher? Absolutely not. Nope, not at all. And when I was a student and taking my first piano lessons, I discussed that in my Jazz Musicianship Part 5 video, if you want to go check that out, my own musical background. But I used zero method books. In fact, these things were all things that I found after, years after I started taking lessons. So I was, totally no method book at all. And actually until very, very recently, until I got this book, I had to get this for a college class, so that doesn't really count. And I just came across the hand, and at one point I was like, okay, it may be a good idea to go through some of these exercises, but that was on my initiative. So I think, it depends. On the skill level, but, do you have to do it? Absolutely not. There are tons of ways to teach with, no method book. You don't have to have one. The other thing is, if you as a teacher don't like all the method books, make your own. Make your own exercises. I've done that a lot. If there's you can make your own exercises, tailored to the students. That's something that I do a lot. I'm like, okay, here's something that I think, you can work on. The students like, okay, yeah, I want to do this, and then I will make them that exercise. And it's a scalar thing, or it's it could be anything. A jazz exercise could be any sort of thing. They can practice on their own. So those are my thoughts about method books. If you'd like to see additional videos like this, please leave a comment, and please leave your criticisms down in the comments as well. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching it. Please subscribe to the channel, share this video, and do all of that.